Some more about talk. In the city, under ordinary conditions, that is. Amongst other things, you could say that talk is for the purpose of, now this is city views, city kinds of terminology, that talk is for the purpose of establishing the truth, correcting errors, converting the foolish, overwhelming the weak and the unsuitable. Now, that about covers what talk does in the cities. Now think about it. It's not an attack on talk, but think about what talk, how it seems to have a purpose, even though it may not be stated as such. There may not even be a purpose stated. It may apparently be social conversation. But you take, I've about covered it, all the way from, all that's in quotation marks, of course, because I'm quoting city sources, from establishing the truth to overcoming the unsuitable. And there in the middle, straightening people out, converting foolish, ignorant people. Within that spectrum, as I have just described it, you could then see a connection. You could see in such a way that it would not be untoward to call talk of all nature in the city combative. Not in just the ordinary sense that one person is trying to whip a negative rap on somebody else, because it can apparently be quite social, quite amenable conversation between friends, and yet it is somewhere, not unsuitably, can you take my descriptions of establishing the truth, correcting error, converting the foolish, and overcoming the weak and unsuitable. You could see even social conversation smiles truly at city levels, social conversation as being combative, because it will fit one of those categories. Not going to make them more, not going to make them less, but it will fit one of those categories. You see it as a kind of competition with other talk, not just with people. Of course, when I say combative, it is not that just talk is in some way physically combative, but the talk is in some way competitive with other talk, either tacit or stated, that it is a competition of ideas, being just a form of talk. But then I was going to ask you to consider any kind of revolutionary, any kind of new intelligence would not be combative. It would not be competitive with other ideas. Now, if we used, just for a laughing moment, if we tried to use, let's just play like that, maybe this kind of stuff that we've been talking about, just use it as a foolish example of what might be that kind of activity. This, or anything else you tried to do, you apparently are having to compare what you're talking about with something else, metaphorically, materially, directly, indirectly. And it would appear to all reasonable, logical city audiences, city ears, that in some way you are proposing a combat, that the descriptions coming from some new source, some other source, is saying our descriptions of the truth, the kinds of directions we're giving to help correct your course in life, is superior, is better, is more correct, is more truthful, is stronger, more suitable than ideas you've heard before or ideas that you perhaps now entertain yourself. And yet the reality of it, a more manifold reality outside of the limits of height, breadth, and depth, and even horizontal time, is something else. Because real information, now forget that you were hearing it from another person, from another source, on your own. New information, that is new thought, not new ways of thinking about something you already thought, not new views of something you already knew, but actually new thought, whatever that might be, new intelligence. Not new info now, but new intelligence, the new processing, the new gathering, which you might say primarily the new processing would not be combative. Conversely, if it is combative, then it's not new. Because if it is truly new, it has no natural opponent that we are truly dealing with, the peaceable kingdom, metaphorical painting, Rousseau, wherein you've got brand new ideas, not just a lamb laying down with a lion, that's the best they could do, but you would have a creature, new intelligence, some creature you had never seen, and therefore it would have no natural enemy. This amounts to new intelligence in this fashion not being combative in the sense that any competition amongst other ideas, another way of summing up the spectrum I gave, that other ideas are telling you how, perhaps apparently in a new way, but how to cope with the conflict of ideas, how to cope in life with the combativeness between people, their desires, their motivations, their conscious and unconscious mind, and everything else that they talk about and think about in the city. So you could see that very well known belief systems, philosophies, just general ideas inside the nervous system of man at the ordinary level, which is the city, seem to be telling man how to cope. Whereas if you're dealing with information, if you're dealing with the processing of thought that has no natural enemies, then it is no longer any even illusionary activity about how to cope. It would be then subtle hints, sublime direction regarding the fact that you don't have to cope with the general conflict that prevails in the city. Now, to some degree, there's no doubt everyone is in the combat. To a certain degree, you're always going to live in the city, even if you physically removed yourself and became a hermit, because your nervous system was born in the city, and you don't have to worry about Thomas Wolfe and you can't go home. That ain't the problem. You can't leave home is really what they were getting at. You know, and you don't have to get intrigued with look homeward angel. You don't have to look homeward angel because nobody ever leaves. You can look way off angel and go, boy, I wish I could leave here, which is, in a sense, what secondary activities in life are about. That, boy, I wish I could leave here, but since I can't, I'll play like I can. Or since I can't, I'll become a flourish. Somebody who collects stamps. Someday I'll actually announce it for you stamp collectors. But it's like, since I can't leave home, by God, I'll buy a new car. That's what I'll do. I'll get a haircut. But there is, if you'd like to slip in, a kind of other hillside rule, ad hoc rule that I could whip or suggest to you. Not whip on you, but suggest to you, and it would go like this. That there are no unavoidable conflicts taking place that demand your individual presence. Might I suggest if you could process that kind of information, it's not just that suddenly this is the greatest thing you ever heard, but if you could process this in a way that there was no inner conflict, if you could process this in a new place in your own nervous system, to wit, your own brain, wherein there was nothing to compare it to, a brand new building site, I would suggest to you that that about wrap it up right there. Well, that would about wrap it up for what appears to be your problems in the city. That is, that would about wrap it up from here down of everything that annoys you that is not primary. And if you got things annoying you in the primary level, then there's not a lot of hope for you. We've already covered that. I let Kyrute do that. That is, if you're sick, you're not going to get well. But to make it sound more cheerful for people who think, well, boy, I'm sick, and that's kind of discouraging. if you could process in a different way to understand that everyone is sick. Everyone is in the city, everyone's staying in the mud and blah, 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 and all that crap. But then to realize that there is no specific, unavoidable conflict of any kind, in the widest sense of conflict. No drama, no scenario, no little episode in life. There is no specific one that's unavoidable that demands your, I don't mean this generically, specifically. There's not any going on that specifically demands your presence and participation. Now, if you were going to go back and pretend that you were still ordinary, and I could say something like, well, all right, if they're going to start fighting some kind of phony baloney war, assuming that there are other kinds, and you thought, well, I might get drafted, I think I'll change my name. I think I'll doctor up my age because I don't believe I want to go fight. And so you could say, well, there's an example that they got plenty of people volunteering to fight. It's just us decided to attack Mississippi. And so the United States, they probably don't need me. So you could say, so I see what you mean. But then ordinary intelligence would say, but there is a different thing. For instance, I don't sweat getting drafted. I know how to handle that. But I'm going to tell you what's bothering me personally. We've got a family reunion coming up down in Biloxi. And I get over there and they drive me crazy. My mother, my grandmother, whatever. Plus the words I had 10 years ago with my uncle over that loan I don't want to go into. And so you would say there are such close situations. We're only talking about a few people, and we're talking about kin. My blood family, and there are conflicts going on. And I've got to go. If I don't go, it'll be even worse. So I've got to go, and I'm going to tell you what. I'm concerned about what's going on in Eastern Europe, and I'm concerned whether Bulgaria will actually be able to pull themselves out of their current state of sloth and into some democratic free. But that kind of thing is going to have to get along without me, probably. But we're talking about now serious problems with just me and a few other people. Family situation. Doesn't matter. If you had a new kind of intelligence, and it can be, if that's getting too strange, you and one other person. You and the person you live with. Well, she's all I got, or he's all I got, or I don't feel like changing right now. I like him or her. But good God, it's a constant struggle. It's just some kind of conflict going all the time. There is no, I'll repeat this, proposed ad hoc, spurious, specious, ephemeral, temporary, in passing rule. There are no unavoidable conflicts, dramas, scenes, dances taking place that require your individual presence. Now, that's not true in the city, because everything I just said about the family reunion and wars and a struggle between two people in a relationship, in the city, that's all true. And all of this is just junk. But if you are trying to think in a new way, if you're trying to find what is a reality of a new intelligence, it is just a fact. I can't convert you to it. There's no way to try and grab you by the head and say, look over this way, and twist your head like this, and try and think like this great person that I'm quoting. Try and think like this book says that we're reading and studying. You can't do it. You just have to realize there are no unavoidable dramas, dances, scenarios, battles, struggles of any nature, anywhere, that has your name on it. Now, in the city it does. Because if I was trying to say this to somebody in the city, they'd say, listen, boy, you're right that this don't tell you how to cope. This tells you how to even go nuttier than I am. Because my name is on this relationship. I'm married to this guy or this girl. I'm married to my mother. I was born in this family. And she's driving me nuts. I can't just avoid it. Don't tell me my presence is not demanded. And of course, I wouldn't tell them in the city. But I'm going to tell you, there are no unavoidable scenes, dances, struggles, conflicts taking place anywhere that specifically requires your individual presence. And as I said, if you could see that on your own in a certain way beyond the words, that about wraps it up. As far as city life is concerned. But, you know, what else are you going to say? No thanks. Maybe this dance. Got a bunion. Got a tack in my shoe. My socks are falling down. I'll be right over there. Love to dance with you. Be over in a second. Put me down for the next one. Or, of course, you might find out, if you want to stretch the metaphor even further, you might find out what other people do not normally find out in the city, that it's possible to go outside the dance hall for a smoke. Or a little, if you got a bat wing in your pocket, and go out there and take a little snort. Which, of course, cuts down, you might say, parabolically speaking, of even having to go through the kind of scene of saying, oh, I can't dance this one, but, catch me next time. If you can wander outside, you don't even have to go through that. Well, I obviously made the point with you people here, but do note this. It's simple, and what could be simpler than what I'm saying? Whether an ordinary person could do it or whether you can do it is another question. Which is, I like that Kairoot about the guy saying, can I do it? Asking that fictitious rebel leader, could I maybe do this without you? And hell, the question is, are you sure you can do it with me? Because you can turn all that internally. Like the best part that you think is the smartest part in you, and sometimes you think, well, is this best part, is it really strong enough to carry me along? I mean, what if I kind of drifted off and I didn't have the benefits of my best self, my best thoughts? Could I make it then? That ain't the question. The question is, doing the absolute best you can, are you going to make it? Just a little entertainment, though. But back to what I was going to say is to realize that you do not individually have to do anything that is unprofitable. You do not have to drift with whatever dance is going on. You're not in conflict with it if you understand you're not. There is no competitiveness between what you think and what everybody else thinks unless you're at the level that that's the only way thought operates. Which at city level, that is the only way it operates. That is why we have 3 dimensions, or that's why we have conflicting opinions. That is why the world's big enough for everyone. Because if it wasn't big enough for everyone, then everyone would only have one thought. That is, we would then be truly a band of fanatics. And it'd be so boring that I'd suggest that you don't have to worry about ecological catastrophes or atomic destruction. I guess Brother Elliot would finally be happy the world would go out with even less than a whimper. It would just kind of lay there and go and drift off and never wake back up from boredom. Insofar as me trying to get you to consider that a new kind of intelligence, or even making it sound easier verbally, of a kind of revolutionary information, not being combative, not being competitive, you could look at it, if you wanted to, sort of like revolutionary or new intelligence being a kind of storytelling, a kind of mythological discoursing. In that, like any good story or a good myth, if you ever consider it, they do not, even at the ordinary level, they do not attempt to convert. They do not, a good myth does not really attempt to enter into combat with some other myth. And they are certainly not if it's a real, what I mean, or even what they mean in the city, if it's a real myth, a real good story, a real good tale, it is not even based on whether it's true or not. Now, this sounds familiar at all? A real tale, a real story, a real myth is in no way tied to any question as to whether it is true or whether it is false. What you've got from one verbal view that I'm about to offer is what you've got is a previously unnoticed, entertaining twist to things. But consider a twist to things does not necessarily put something in conflict. It's not to take something that's going on in life and say, well, here is the institutional situation that humanity is engaged in over at this place at this time in the area of social justice and law and economics. To make an ordinary observation in the city, you have offered a competing idea. You have offered a combative analysis. No matter how genteel you are about it. You do not hold the same view. You do not have the same idea as the one that you are beginning to note. Because if you did, you would not note it. You would be part of it. You would be in the fanatical world wherein there are no landscapes. It would all be that great, endless, boring, all agreed, unnoticed fanaticism. A place of no dimensions. But don't get lost. In other words, whatever you're going to say, if you say, well, I'd like to make a comment about the growing apparent intrigue with democratic processes in Eastern Europe, then what you're going to say is that you have some view, you're about to express something specifically that is contrary to something that somebody else has already told you, either on the TV, in person, or in print. Or else you would not be making some comment. You understand that? That's simple enough. Real revolutionary information, if it could be passed about, if it were actually a thing, which it's not, but if we stick with that, then there's nothing else to talk about. So, but if we're going to talk about it as though it's a thing, as though it is actual information, then I was suggesting to you that it is somewhere outside the ordinary realms of information and ideas, no matter how you try and clarify them, or how you try and qualify them, because they are not what passes for ordinary intelligence, operationally so. Not fallaciously so, but in the city, that all ideas are combative. All talk is combative. No matter what it is, I love you is combative. To tell somebody that. It is combative. In the sense, as far as I was trying to push it to get you to look inside yourself in a certain way, if there was such a thing as revolutionary information, it would not be combative, and it would be closer to a myth, a tale. Real storytelling, because it is not tied to, it is not based upon any question of it being true or false, which is just, of course, ridiculous at city level. Maybe a little less than ridiculous, maybe a little more than ridiculous. I'll leave it to you. You can cut the fine corners. But you can look at it as being an entertaining twist. But a twist does not necessarily put something in opposition to what it was previously. It's just a twist. Or if you're really good, how about a burlesque with a certain little spin on it? A little certain James Brown step. You can call it burlesque. Not satire, since I decided to get linguistically correct. Because satire is that which is based upon some sort of critique. Satire is no more than ideas. Satire is information in the city. But burlesque really covers it, because there is no criticism involved. It's just you're making fun of what somebody else believes. And we'll assume, the dictionary says something like that last time but we'll assume, trust me, that the dictionary was not being sarcastic. All right. And so you're talking about a kind of information that is not combative, is not in conflict with other information. The same way that a myth does not even purport to be true or false. I mean, who would even worry? What civilized, what fairly sane person in the city would worry about just standard mythology of some kind, or a tall tale of Paul Bunyan or Johnny Appleseed? Of course, he may have existed, but anything that passes for just a tale, Aesop's fables, anything. Who, just what reasonable, up the ordinary city level of thinking, has any concern over, assuming they enjoyed it at all or found it intriguing just for a few minutes to read it or hear some tale, about whether it's true or false? Because you might at first say, well, it's obviously not true. I don't believe that gods lived up on a mount somewhere and that Zeus and all these people did that. And so it would sort of be an intellectual affront I suggest, for a reasonable person to be asked, do you believe those stories? Do you believe that Greek mythology actually happened? It's kind of insulting. It's not even based on that. It never even crossed my mind whether it's true or false. It is absolutely, in the true sense, it is moot. That's not what a myth's about. That's one thing. But now can you conceive of that which is inconceivable at the city level, of there being something that is not simply mythical, that is, I'm going to have to, of course, now get oxymoronical, or else admit that I'm talking inside of my own mouth backwards, that which apparently is trying to convey some information, and yet it's got nothing to do with true or false. And the whole city, if it was listening, would go, "Give me a break." Nah, child's play. Well, so much for the harmless prelude. I had something really good in mind tonight, and we got half the tape left. That's about what I had in mind, at least in half my mind. I don't guess you should pursue that. You get into things like a man with half a mind and all that. Now, it might frighten some of the people that might see it on tape because they might think this really is PBS. All right, for the real stuff. Has anybody ever noticed this? Have you ever noticed how everybody, many, many times, that you will almost burst, or in Mississippi, bust, to retell a joke you've heard, something you heard, gossip? And the answer, of course, is yes. You don't even have to think. But in the city, this phenomenon would be thought of, and it is thought of. It's been talked about in religion, in fact, but all the way up to today into non-clerical areas, that this kind of motivation, this kind of desire to retell something would be seen as simply a psychological phenomenon of the individual's personality. That some people like to gossip, some don't. Some people can tell a joke, some can't. Some people seem to like jokes, and they'll tell you that, boy, I wish I could tell jokes. Some will stand around and tell them, and I got a bad memory. See, all of that has psychological connotations. I can't remember good. Or somebody says, well, I like to tell jokes, but I'm always afraid that I'll blow the punchline and I'll be humiliated and I'm shy enough and blah, blah, blah. That all of this desire, and even the gossip, of course, back in your forefathers, Western and even most Eastern religions, that in some way gossip, talking about your fellow man, which all gossip has some kind of pejorative connotation, should be avoided. But still it has to do with the individual, that perhaps your heart is not in line properly with the great cosmic gods of our religion, and so you're being led astray, and you're inclined to hear some nasty piece of some tale about your neighbor and repeat it. You notice it's all given over to the individual, and then psychologically they would say, well, there's something having to do with certain people's personalities that makes them want to retell gossip, to retell jokes, to even discuss what they hear on the news. But whoa, 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 whoa. Can I ask you to consider that which no one has ever said on this planet? Big deal. But, whoa. This desire that everyone's had, don't fight it, you know it's true. And don't just pick gossip or jokes, but of you wanting to pass along things you've heard, things that somebody told you, things you read. And it was not in any way a negative comment when I started this section by saying, have you ever noticed how you almost feel like you're going to burst? That's not just a colloquial put observation or suggestion. It's almost an irrepressible desire that goes on all the time for you to convey something you heard, to pass it on. Everybody knows that. But now back to the woe part. Would you care to consider this? That these quite real, strong, worldwide urges are due to words being alive. But notice, the reasonable, the worldwide first story is that all of these desires to, let's gossip, take away the pejorative aspect, to retell, to talk, to pass along things you heard. That the first story is always looking at the individual. That some people seem to want to retell things more, some people talk more, but it refers to the individual's makeup. Forget the individual. Forget the race of man. What if this continuing, irrepressible desire to pass along some words got nothing to do with you? The words are alive. It's always good to know that even some of the things that could be potentially dangerous never prove to be immediately that captious. That is, that even the ones that I toy around with and decide to put in some sort of, or try to, pretty straightforward ballistics, that still I can fire them off and people go, Which, it just shows the great resiliency, the great self-protection of life, that more people cannot in any way be infected with this sort of thing. Or that people with still trapped minds can get exposed to stuff like this and listen to some of it, take notes for a while, even like it, and then showing the good, robust health, the ready cheekness of life in general, can just walk away from it like, well, that's enough of that. I'm going to something else. Like, well, enough's enough. Thank God that's usually true. How about last time that we were taping and I was trying to get you to consider the matter of the power of words, and I pointed out to you, or tried to get you to see, that in the city, if you were asking what is the main requirement, what is the most important character in talk, and its power being continuously spread, passed along in life, and that contemporary intelligence, ordinary city thinking would say, well, the speaker, because you sure can't have anything said unless somebody says it. You recall, and then I tried to get you to see that just as valid and just as necessary, to say the very least, is someone to hear it, an audience. You've got the performer / speaker, but words, it's just literally a fact in the three-dimensional world. Words do not even exist, which I'd suggested. If any of you would like to wonder why that good old story about the tree falling in the Zen forest, and does it have a sound? Not. Words are not alive. The sound of the word of a tree falling does not exist. There is no power in it. It doesn't matter whether it exists. It's not having anything to do with the physics of the three-dimensional world as to whether sound waves are actually set up by the tree falling, or whether it is by this fanatic, this soul fanatic, saying things that no one listens to. It's not a question of whether he actually, or the tree actually sets off sound waves. It's not that. But it's they have no life. There is no importance whatsoever. There is no validity. There is no vitality. There is no viability. There is no vigor. There is no vivaciousness to the sound waves unless there is an audience, a receptive, reactive listener to the sound. You can see that, and it's obvious once you see it. But now let us add this other dimension to it. Could you see that in the question now is that, or from the kind of view that for words to have any power, that you have got to have a speaker / performer, and you've got to have a listener / audience. that equally as necessary would be the words themselves. But you got to admit, if you can look right quick, for no particular reason, if I'd never brought this up, you'd never thought about it. For one reason, it is too FO. That means it's too bloody obvious. All right, BO. It's too bloody obvious. But is it? If words were actually alive, if they were semi-sentient entities and beings themselves, if I may rephrase you and I, our collective wisdom, that would explain more than ordinary contemporary city thinking ever even imagined should be answered. If words were actually alive, and don't just stay with a metaphor, because metaphors got bad limps. All metaphors need walkers and wheelchairs. The power behind a real metaphor, if it becomes a mythical metaphor, that is, it's not in competition, it's not based on, well, is this true or false? It then enters the realm of new information, and I am trying to get you to see that there is a distinct possibility, I'll leave it at that for the time being, that words are alive, not metaphorically. You need more? How about this? This is an accepted wisdom, observation at city level, and it goes like this, and it's been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. Those who talk the most have the least to say. And there is no logical, sequential explanation of that in the city. None. And yet almost any reasonable thinking person would say that there is great validity to that. And there is. It's not an illusion that just wandering the face of this planet at any given time, the people who are talking the most seem to have the least to say. That you'll find a cab driver, good red circuit based ordinary people, talking more than you would an atomic physicist. It always has been thusly, even before they knew the word thusly. And there is no explaining this. I guess probably somebody's tried, now that I say it, that some psychologist or some armchair thinkers probably tried to say, well, people with inferior education are just prone to just babble on because they don't stop and give any thought. They don't reflect on what they're talking about, and they probably do not have serious discussions the way other intellectuals like I, when we sit around, we ponder and smoke pipes and look off and do this. And we reflect, we meditate on what we're going to say, and therefore we may have less to say, but it is obviously of more importance. And I don't know, just ordinary folks, they just seem to just run off at the mouth. What does that tell you? Nothing. All that tells you is a self-serving observation that life makes people anyway. It's like first story, that the people that have the least to say talk the most. And why is that? Well, it seems to be that people who talk the most have the least to say. Oh, well, I'm glad. I'm glad you cleared that up. I'll tell you what will clear it up is what I just proposed to you. That it's got nothing to do with the individual, with the conduct. Do it for the sound. The words are alive, and as John Lee Hooker would say, they're going to come out. Just like the boogie. But if the words, not metaphorically, but if words were actually living beings, and I know that is pushing the metaphor to call them beings, but if they were living entities of some kind, living, there you have what there is no city word for, but is an explanation. City level explanations, of course, are just attempts at crude treatment. But there you have a real explanation, which is silent. That is, if you can see it, that words could be actually alive, then hey, that's an explanation. That's a real explanation. That's at least a five-dimensional explanation to say, wait a minute, if words were alive, then Remember what I was trying to get you to consider the Punch and Judy last time we were taping, which again can easily and properly represent, if you looked at one hand, all coming from the same actor, but there seems to be the different players going on, and the left hand being, let's say, the performer slash speaker, and over here is the audience slash listener. And it would seem to cover all possible scenarios, all dances. But if words are alive, then you have got a new situation. You do not have just the observed couple dance of the human samba. You would have to inject a third dancer. You would have a triadic choreography that would then entail a speaker, a listener, and words themselves. And I'll say this rhetorically, quote, if you do not suspect, if you do not see that that would change everything about what talk is about, then fire on you. That was just rhetorical. I'm trying to suggest to you to seriously consider, because there is, I would further suggest, certain evidence, not statistically meaningful yet, since it's not even statistical, but there is certain evidence that I suggest to you is, where did I say it? Oh, everywhere, that words are alive, that there is as much reality of words being a separate entity as there is having a person here talking and a person over there listening. And of course, then it reverses back and forth. Like any dance, you dance forward, then you dance backward. But there's no doubt, for talk to have any validity, for talk to be alive, you've got to have two people. Now, we covered that last taping. You've got to see that. It's not philosophical, it's not theoretical, it's not even metaphorical. It is so far past first story that, again, it gives the word obvious a bad name. That a speaker is not the most important for talk to be alive. In first story, ordinary contemporary intelligence says, well, yes. If this is a quiz and you're going to say, insofar as talk being necessary to human life and talk going on, what is the most important ingredient in talk? Zing. Yes, Bill, what is it? And Bill says, a talker. And they say, very good. And the crowd goes, and that seems to cover it. And then we're going to the next category. Brand-flavored breakfasts in the Restoration period. Or what made Charles II throw up every morning. I don't know. And that would seem to cover it. But it doesn't. Remember, I gave you, I thought was a great example, a philosopher. I picked out one I thought would ring your city nervous system chimes more, talk about some dangerous demagogue or some fanatic. And if he has no listeners, no reactive listeners, somebody hears what he's saying, he's over there ranting and raving about some political or economic or religious or political idea, and somebody hears the words and says, boy, that's dangerous. Something should be done about that maybe. But then they realize that no one is listening. There is no audience for it. Then at the only adjective that even came to mind that I threw in, he's sort of a pathetic figure. But he's not even pathetic, because nobody's going to try and comfort him and say, there, a little would-be fanatic. But the point is, he is innocuous. But then you turn away and you look back, and now somebody, the same observer that made the comment that, well, he's pathetic, but he's harmless. Move along horizontal time, you look back, and the same person say, wait a minute, we have got to do something, and you say, what's happened? Well, the guy's got a following. And that all sounds like first story sense. But what actually happened? It's the same guy, the same words, but now he has an audience. And so it's not zing, yes, Bill. He says the most important thing is a talker. No, it's not. Because if we're really going to be silly, that is, be logical in the 3D world, Then the announcer, the MC of the quiz show, say, Bill, that was awfully close. Darn, you just barely missed it. Talker is not the answer. Listener! And the crowd goes. And they'd have to turn the applause sign and prompt them to go, well, I don't know about that. But that is equally as valid. And it's not seen that way. So you're supposed to be up to speed to where you could tell yourself now if the question that we said, all right, everybody get your finger on your buzzer. What is the most important aspect, ingredient, the most important part of talk having a life? And you go, zing. And I say, all right, everybody, and you say, a talker and a listener. Or you could answer to really cover your assets to say, a talker and or a listener, or any combination thereof, are separated. And then the MC would have to say, well, you got me. And that would seem to absolutely cover it once you see that. See, because I gave you 48 hours that now you can say, well, I am smarter. I have a different processing view from a new place of what talk is, because I can now see on my own that somebody say something, no matter what it is, even if it's dangerous like this fanatic, or if it was something supposedly enlightening like Buddha, and nobody ever listened to him, Buddha would not be enlightening. If you like to read things that Buddha supposedly said and go, boy, those words are heavy. You know, surfs up in my brain on that. If it hadn't been an audience, the words got no power. Nobody would remember them. They simply do not exist. And so you could then say, well, I am smarter. I process this information better than I did 48 hours ago because it's true. I see this correct. That is a better understanding and a better view that for talk to be alive, to have any power, negative, positive, it doesn't matter, you have got to have not just a talker, but an audience, a listener. A reactive listener is what I mean by an audience. And there has to be a dance going on. There can't be one person saying something, another person staying there. And in a sense, not really listening. The sound waves might physically hit their eardrum, but they are not dancing. There is no combat going on between the two. So you can say, boy, I got a more manifold, a more expansive view than I did. But whoa. Make room. Come on. You could have said, well, I thought I had one answer. That the most important ingredient for talk to be alive is, here it comes, because you only get one shot at the answer. Buzz, all right, what's your 100% answer? My 100% answer is a talker. All right, so you got a little bit better. And you cut that down, still left the talker, but you made him split up your answer. That now it's the talker and the listener. Whoa. Make room. Cut them down again, because there's another one, I suggest, possibly. The words themselves. It had been my personal hope to leave the examples at the one when I suggested that the closest to an explanation as to why it is that those who talk the most seem to have the least to say, which just, why would life be arranged that way, if indeed that is a fair observation under many conditions? Why in the world? And there is no way to explain it unless you're just going to say, well, life's nuts. And intellectual, ordinary people at that level now do not believe that about life. They're not supposed to. They do not think that way. They may think, well, the energy's been misdirected through unconscious traumas of childhood and all that stuff. That is, Punch and Judy are not dancing and communicating in the fullest possible way. Right. If you put another dancer into the dance, if you take words themselves as being alive, you have got to take that simple example of why those who apparently have the least to say seem to want to talk the most. You have got an absolutely, if I call it a surprising possibility, then of course surprising should surprise you when you think, well, there's no stronger way to put it, because you'd have never thought. That kind of information is not part of the ordinary thought process. Only that would explain this, unless you're just going to, as I said, which is no longer valid. That is no longer operational, even at ordinary city level, is to say, well, city people, just ordinary humanity, is more or less nuts. I mean, why do people commit suicide? That's the same way that people that don't have much to say, they talk the most. That's just the way it is. Jesus. Now, that won't do. But I did point out to you there is no sequential, logical, reasonable explanation at all for that. And you could try forever if I'd say, well, everybody think about it. Let's have a real contest. Everybody think, what could possibly be the purpose in life being arranged to where those who talk the most seem to have the least to say? And I'll suggest to you, rather than waiting 48 hours to say, next time we get together, tell me what you think. You couldn't come up with anything other than, well, things are mixed up. Life's nuts, or things are upside down. As far as there being some, quote, logical, possible explanation or purpose for this, you would find none. None, none, none. I bring this out not to pick on you, but to see if you had thought that, if you follow this later on your own spare time, there is no way down logical roads in sequential manners in reasonable ways that you would ever come up with any possible why it is that people who talk the most seem to have the least to say. But notice when I gave you, words are alive. Let's get down to 3 words. That has nothing to do with logic. It does not fit in any sequence of thought at city level. And yet there is the explanation. All right. Those of you weak of heart, there is a possible explanation. Is it not? It is not. I mean, it is. If that were true, that's it. I mean, another case closed. Tell Della Street to send the next client. We got this one covered. But that's it. If words are alive, then this whole thing about, well, certain people talk a certain way, certain people talk a lot, some people talk a little bit, some people talk very forcefully, and some people talk very shyly. All you're talking about is a dance couple. You look out down the floor, and that describes everybody. To try and say, well, the individual outlet, conduit, manifestator of talk is what's of consequence. That's why some people talk a lot, some a little, because it has to do with the individual personality. Tell me something new. I mean, why don't you, if that was your response, if that was ordinary city response, how about try and quote somebody to show your grasp of history? Why not try and quote some thoughts even older than 3,000 years old? But if you take that dance couple and you turn it into a triaxual choreography to where you have as an equal partner at the very least, and don't have time to go on, but as you take as an absolute equal partner the talker, the listener, and the words, and you'll have to figure out your own kind of dance. It would no longer be a socially acceptable merengue or samba, but you've got some sort of folk dance, and you've got 3 people of equal significance. Then all these questions, all these possibilities, all these theories about the significance of the individual personality vis-a-vis what they say, it's like taking a great weight off of your poor little brain if you were trying to analyze such things, because they cannot be analyzed satisfactorily. There is no sequential end to that kind of episodic question as to why does things seem to be in this manner, and many of them. I was going to say I wasn't going to give him more examples, and I obviously can't now if I wanted to, but if you look around, besides the one of why is it those who talk the most seem to have the least to say, think of all sorts of things. You hear them all the time, little axioms, little truisms, things that you even think regarding, and especially certain people, politicians, a minister, a pushy person, a big tall woman, a little old short guy that looks peaked and pale. And then you see that there seems to be some almost archetypical connection between types of people, personality types, even physical types, and their talk. But if you say, well, why? I mean, if your observation is true, why? There is no why. Unless you're going to say, well, unconscious motivations. Ha ha, you thought you'd get me. I got that. You might as well say the gods made me do it. There is no analyzation possible except this one. The possibility that the individual is of no significance. Well, all right, is of significance, but the person talking is of 33 1/3% significance. Whoever's hearing it, the audience, it doesn't matter, is of equal significance. And the words, if the words are alive, outside, beyond, apart from the speaker, that they have a life of their own, which again will explain, if you want one more, why is it that you have an absolute irrepressible desire to say things? Now, see, I started out easy. I said, to tell a joke you heard. It's not just that, it's to talk. But it seems as though you're continually retelling something. What if the analyzation is incorrect to say, well, it has to do with your personality type? Nuh-uh, it has to do with words. As John Lee said about the boogie, they're in you and they got to come out. And it doesn't matter who you are. And it doesn't matter how they come out, whether you mumble them, whether you talk real loud, whether you talk fast, whether you talk with a southern accent, whether you talk with a Romanian accent. What if the words are of equal importance, strength, as the couple itself, the performer and the audience? Well, let me leave it to you this way. If you've got even just the remote possibility, let's put it that way, of ever developing revolutionary lungs, then I'd have to say, if you can begin to see this, this will, by God, take your breath away. Well, it'll at least take your breath away from the city